Marcus Sterling stood in his penthouse office, Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. The cream-colored envelope in his hands felt heavier than any business contract he'd ever signed. Elena Rodriguez and James Morrison cordially invite you to their wedding ceremony. The words blurred as memories flooded back, Elena's laugh echoing through their college dorm, her hand in his as they dreamed of building an empire together, the night she walked away because his ambition had consumed everything else. He'd built that empire, becoming one of the youngest tech billionaires in history, but success felt hollow without her. The invitation trembled slightly in his grip as he realized he had exactly 2 weeks to decide whether to attend the wedding of the only woman he'd ever truly loved. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside his glass tower, Marcus felt more isolated than ever, surrounded by luxury that meant nothing without Elena by his side. 10 years had passed since Elena left, and Marcus had channeled his heartbreak into an unstoppable drive for success. His tech company, Sterling Innovations, had revolutionized artificial intelligence and made him billions. Magazine covers featured his sharp jawline and piercing grey eyes, declaring him the most eligible bachelor in America. But Marcus felt like an imposter in his own life. He dated models and heiresses, attended charity galas and exclusive parties, yet none of it filled the Elena-shaped void in his chest. His assistant knocked gently, entering with his afternoon schedule, but Marcus barely heard her voice. The wedding invitation lay open on his mahogany desk like an accusation, reminding him of every choice he'd made that led him away from the woman who once believed in him before he even believed in himself. That evening, he cancelled his dinner with a prominent investor and instead found himself driving through their old college town, seeking ghosts of a happiness he'd traded for stock options and board meetings. Elena Rodriguez had built a beautiful life in Portland, far from the tech world's chaos where she'd once dreamed of conquering alongside Marcus. As a successful environmental lawyer, she fought for causes that mattered, finding purpose in protecting the planet rather than profiting from it. Her fiancé, James, was everything Marcus wasn't: steady, present, emotionally available. He brought her coffee every morning, remembered their anniversary, and never checked his phone during dinner. Yet as she tried on her wedding dress in the boutique, surrounded by her mother and sister's excited chatter, Elena's mind wandered to a pair of grey eyes that once looked at her like she held the secrets of the universe. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as pre-wedding jitters. James was a good man who would be a wonderful husband and father. Their relationship was built on compatibility and shared values, not the destructive passion that had burned her so badly before. But late at night, when James slept peacefully beside her, Elena sometimes wondered what would have happened if Marcus had chosen love over ambition all those years ago. Marcus sat in his private jet, staring at his laptop screen where Elena's LinkedIn profile glowed. She looked radiant in her professional headshot, her dark hair framing features that had haunted his dreams for a decade. The plane was fueled and ready to take him anywhere in the world: Tokyo for a board meeting, London for a merger, anywhere but Oregon, where his heart was pulling him. His business partner called, wondering why he'd cancelled 3 important meetings, but Marcus couldn't explain that he was having an existential crisis over a wedding invitation. He'd always been decisive, ruthless even in business, but Elena made him feel like that uncertain 22-year-old again. The rational part of his mind insisted he should send a polite decline and an expensive gift, moving on with his carefully constructed life. But the part of him that remembered what it felt like to be truly alive whispered that some chances only come once, and he'd already wasted one. As the sun set over the city, Marcus made the decision that would change everything. He was going to Portland, not to stop the wedding, but to face his past and finally find closure. The rehearsal dinner took place at an elegant vineyard overlooking the Columbia River, fairy lights twinkling like captured stars in the Oregon twilight. Elena moved gracefully between tables, thanking guests and accepting congratulations, but her smile felt painted on. James's college friends shared embarrassing stories while her family beamed with pride, yet something felt hollow about the celebration. She excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe, when her cousin mentioned seeing a familiar face at the hotel bar. Marcus Sterling, tech billionaire, had checked into the Four Seasons that afternoon. Elena's heart stopped, her reflection in the mirror showing a woman who suddenly looked terrified. Why was he here? After 10 years of silence, why now? She gripped the marble countertop, trying to steady herself as memories crashed over her like waves. The night he chose a crucial investor meeting over her birthday dinner, the morning she found him asleep at his desk again. The final fight, when she realized she was losing him to his ambition. Back at the table, James squeezed her hand with concern, but Elena could barely focus on his words as her mind raced with possibilities and fears about what Marcus's presence might mean. Marcus hadn't planned to attend the rehearsal dinner, but his rental car seemed to drive itself to the vineyard. He parked at the edge of the lot, watching through the restaurant's warm windows as Elena laughed at something James said. She looked exactly as he remembered, yet somehow more radiant, success and happiness glowing from within. He was about to leave when she stepped onto the terrace alone, the evening breeze catching her dress. Their eyes met across 30 yards of manicured garden, and time stopped. Elena's hand flew to her throat in surprise, while Marcus felt his carefully rehearsed explanations evaporate. They stood frozen. Two people who had once planned to change the world together, now strangers in each other's lives. Elena glanced back toward the warm light of the party, then made a decision that surprised them both. She walked toward him. The gravel crunched under her heels as she approached, and Marcus caught the familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, that brought back 1,000 memories. "Hello, Elena," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Her eyes searched his face, looking for answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Elena's voice carried a mixture of hurt and curiosity as they stood in the vineyard's shadowy alcove, hidden from the rehearsal dinner's warm glow. Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't sound desperate or manipulative, knowing that whatever he said next would define their interaction forever. He told her about the invitation, about how seeing her name in elegant script had shattered his carefully constructed world, about the success that felt meaningless without someone to share it with. Elena listened with the same focused attention she'd once given his wildest entrepreneurial dreams, her dark eyes reflecting moonlight and memories. She spoke softly about her life in Portland, her work, her relationship with James, but Marcus heard the careful way she avoided mentioning love. The conversation felt like walking through a minefield of shared history, each word potentially explosive. When James appeared at the terrace door, calling Elena's name with mild concern, the spell broke. Elena stepped back as if waking from a dream, the distance between them suddenly feeling like an ocean. "I have to go," she whispered, but her eyes lingered on his face for one more moment before she turned away. Marcus returned to his hotel suite, but couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Seeing Elena again had confirmed what he'd suspected for years. No amount of success could fill the void she'd left behind. He paced the marble floors, his reflection haunting him from every polished surface, wondering if his presence would ruin her happiness. Meanwhile, across town, Elena lay awake beside James, her mind replaying every moment of their encounter. James slept peacefully, trusting and content, making her feel like a fraud for the emotions Marcus had stirred up with just his presence. She thought about the man Marcus had become, more confident, more polished, but with the same intensity that had both attracted and terrified her years ago. Had he really changed? Or was he still the man who would sacrifice anything for success? The wedding dress hung in her closet like a reproach, white silk that suddenly felt like a prison. Dawn approached slowly, finding both Elena and Marcus staring at ceilings, wondering what the morning would bring and whether some doors were better left closed. Elena's wedding day dawned crisp and clear, Oregon's autumn painting the landscape in gold and crimson. The historic chapel buzzed with activity as florists arranged white roses and baby's breath while the string quartet tuned their instruments. Elena sat in the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids' excited chatter, but felt strangely detached from the celebration. Her mother fussed with her veil while her sister applied final touches of makeup, both women glowing with joy for her special day. Yet Elena's mind kept drifting to grey eyes and the way Marcus had looked at her the night before, like she was something precious he'd lost and never expected to see again. She tried to focus on James, on the good life they would build together, but doubt crept in like morning fog. At the Four Seasons, Marcus stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with the same precision he brought to board meetings. He'd made his decision during the sleepless night. He would attend the ceremony, wish Elena well, and finally find the closure he needed to move forward. It was the right thing to do, the mature thing to do. So why did every instinct scream at him to run? The chapel filled with guests as the ceremony hour approached, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews. James stood at the altar, handsome in his navy suit, radiating calm confidence as he chatted with his best man. Elena's family claimed the front rows, while James's colleagues and college friends filled the rest, everyone dressed in their finest attire for the celebration. Marcus slipped in quietly, choosing a seat in the back corner where shadows would hide his presence. The string quartet began the processional, and guests rose as Elena's bridesmaids walked gracefully down the aisle in their sage green dresses. Marcus's breath caught when Elena appeared at the chapel's entrance, a vision in ivory silk and vintage lace, her father's arm steady beside her. She looked radiant, every inch the perfect bride, but Marcus noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. As she glided down the aisle, their gazes met for just a moment across the crowded chapel. Time suspended itself in that instant, two hearts acknowledging what words had never quite captured, before Eleanor looked away and continued toward her waiting groom. Father Mackenzie's voice resonated through the chapel as he welcomed the gathered friends and family to witness the union of Elena and James. Marcus watched from his corner sanctuary as Elena took her place beside James, their hands joining in front of the altar, adorned with cascading white flowers. The priest spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage, while Marcus felt each word like a physical blow. When James began his vows, speaking earnestly about Elena's kindness, intelligence, and the peaceful future he envisioned with her, Marcus realized this wasn't just a wedding. It was Elena choosing a completely different life than the one they'd once dreamed of together. James's voice carried genuine emotion as he promised to always put their relationship first. Never to let ambition overshadow love, never to make Eleanor feel like she came second to anything else. The words hit Marcus like accusations, each promise highlighting his own past failures. Elena's eyes glistened with tears as she listened, and for a moment Marcus thought she might be remembering their own broken promises. Then it was Elena's turn to speak, her voice clear and steady as she began to recite the vows that would bind her to another man forever. I promise to love you faithfully, to support your dreams, and to build a life filled with joy and... Eleanor's voice faltered mid-sentence, her eyes finding Marcus's face in the back of the chapel, The pause stretched uncomfortably as guests shifted in their seats, James's encouraging smile beginning to waver with concern. Father Mackenzie cleared his throat gently, thinking Elena had simply lost her place in the emotional moment. But Elena seemed frozen, staring past the decorated altar, past her family's expectant faces, past everything except the man who had once held her heart. James followed her gaze, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something resembling dread as he spotted Marcus. The chapel fell silent, except for the whisper of autumn wind through the old windows. Marcus knew this was his moment. He could remain seated, let Elena finish her vows, and disappear from her life forever. Or he could stand up and fight for the love he'd never stopped feeling. The decision crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. He rose slowly from his seat, his movement causing a ripple of gasps and murmurs throughout the gathered crowd. Every eye turned toward him as he took a step forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I object," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel's shocked silence. The words hung in the air like a challenge, causing Eleanor's bouquet to tremble in her hands, while James stepped protectively closer to her side. Guests turned to stare at the tall figure in the expensive suit who had just disrupted their perfect ceremony, whispers spreading like wildfire through the pews. Father Mackenzie looked flustered, clearly unprepared for such a dramatic interruption in his decades of performing weddings. "Elena," Marcus continued, his grey eyes locked on hers across the chapel, "I know I have no right to be here, no right to speak, but I can't let you make this choice without knowing that I never stopped loving you." His voice grew stronger with each word, years of regret and longing pouring out in front of 200 witnesses. "I was a fool who chose ambition over the best thing that ever happened to me. I built an empire, but lost my soul in the process. You asked me once if I would ever learn to put love first, and I said I didn't know how. I'm here to tell you that you taught me how, and I've spent 10 years learning to be the man you deserved all along." Elena stood frozen at the altar, her world tilting on its axis as Marcus's words echoed through the chapel. James's face had gone pale, his confident demeanor cracking as he realized his perfect wedding day was dissolving before his eyes. The guests sat in stunned silence, some craning their necks for a better view of the unfolding drama, while others exchanged shocked whispers. Elena's mother gripped her father's arm, both parents looking bewildered by the sudden turn of events. "Elena," James said quietly, his voice strained with hurt and confusion. "Tell him to leave. Tell him we belong together." But Elena couldn't speak, her mind reeling between the safe, predictable future James offered and the passionate, uncertain love that Marcus represented. She thought about the sleepless nights, the empty feeling that had haunted her despite James's devotion, the way her heart had recognized Marcus's presence before her mind even processed it. Marcus waited, knowing he'd already risked everything by speaking, understanding that Elena's next words would determine not just his fate, but the trajectory of 3 lives. The chapel held its collective breath as Elena slowly turned to face the man who had just shattered her carefully constructed world with a declaration 10 years in the making. Elena looked into Marcus's eyes and saw not the ambitious young man who had broken her heart, but someone who had learned what it meant to love completely. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to James, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm sorry, James. You're a wonderful man who deserves someone who can love you with her whole heart. But mine has always belonged to someone else." James's face crumpled with pain and humiliation, but he nodded with quiet dignity, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. Elena lifted her veil and placed her bouquet on the altar, then walked slowly down the aisle toward Marcus, each step feeling like coming home. The guests erupted in shocked murmurs, some standing to get a better view of the unprecedented scene. Marcus met her halfway, his hands finding hers as they had so many years ago, and the rest of the world faded away. "Are you sure?" he whispered, knowing the magnitude of what she was sacrificing. "I've never been more sure of anything," Elena replied, her voice steady despite her tears. They walked out of the chapel together, leaving behind the wreckage of one wedding, but carrying the promise of a love that had survived a decade of separation and finally found its way back home. Thank you so much for listening to our story about Marcus and Elena's second chance at love. We hope their journey touched your heart and reminded you that sometimes the greatest courage comes from admitting our mistakes and fighting for what truly matters. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. We love hearing from our global audience and discovering how love stories connect us all, no matter where we call home. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to share more emotional tales of love, redemption, and the power of choosing your heart over your fears.